Hey, welcome back for another episode of the podcast Porn Rewire with me, Dr. Trish Leigh. Today, we're going to talk about be happy to quit porn and heal ED. So, we are going to first and foremost talk about what is happiness, right? We're all chasing it down. It's elusive. How do we get there? What is it? And how do we know we found it? Number 2 is what your brain is doing when you are happy. Number 3 is what your brain is doing when you're unhappy and what it will desperately try to do to offset that unhappy feeling. And then, of course, last, we are going to talk about your brain hack strategy for the day on how you can find happiness so that your brain is in the optimal mode and it creates and perpetuates that happiness for you. And when you're happy, your brain will heal and you won't struggle with erectile dysfunction anymore. And I'm going to tell you how and why. And you're not going to need porn to offset that unhappiness in your nervous system that you may or may not even be aware of. So in this episode, we're going to talk about dopamine. We're going to talk about baseline levels of dopamine. We're going to talk about dopamine spikes, how they work together to try to help your brain feel good. We are going to talk about serotonin. We are also going to talk about energy in the brain and how you can create and keep that optimal brain performance pattern so that you can use all of the neurochemicals to your advantage, hence the leveraging. We are also going to talk about supernormal stimuli, aka porn being at the top of that. And we're going to talk about dopamine stacking. So stay with me for this entire episode. Get a cup of coffee. You know how I love a good cup of coffee. I've been drinking mycotoxin-free coffee. Yep, coffee's moldy. Who would have known? So I've been drinking. It's called VitaCup, I think, and Bulletproof by Dave Asprey. But get yourself one of those. They have antioxidants in it for healthy coffee. And listen in because this is an important conversation. All right, let's start with what is happiness? Why does it seem to elude all of us, me included? So I'm going to put myself into this category of someone who's always trying to be happy and, also dealing with the difficult things in life, but trying to stay out of conflict and stay in peace. So I'm going to give you my definition of happiness. My definition of happiness is peace and joy, peppered with pleasure. Now, of course, I like pleasure too. Who doesn't? We all like pleasure. But happiness isn't about pleasure. Happiness is about peace and joy. So follow me on this one. And I want you to think about this. Get your pleather journal out and start writing in it because this is at the very core of healing erectile dysfunction and at the very core of leaving porn behind. Happiness is essential. Most people in this world these days are not happy. They're not, and that's the reality. And I don't want you to be one of them. You have to be a 1%er with me, chasing down the real dream of life, not the dream that's sold to us in commercials every day. Every commercial basically is about pleasure or offsetting pain. Joy and happiness is found in the quiet moments, in the slower moments. And if you can sit still, search your mind, search your heart, search your body, and find this empty, quiet feeling that allows you to just be, that is happiness. Happiness is found in the smiles of your loved one. Happiness is found in sunsets, in sunrises, and moon rises. It was the most beautiful moon again last night. I know you're probably sick of hearing it from me, but those are the moments of joy and peace. And they're different for everybody, but they're slow and they involve no conflict, no pain, no busyness, no rushing. Happiness is that you've hit a place where you can find contentment. And if you've met me, being content is difficult because I'm always striving. But I have a saying, striving and arriving. Because I'll make sure I arrive at a place when I've worked hard to get there, and I'll sit in it and I will enjoy it. And I will then strive for something else in my life, But my striving is on purpose. It's not to get more pleasure. It's to be and extend love to all the people in my life, including you. That's why I'm here, because I want to create this ripple effect of change through happiness and joy and peace. And I do it through educating people and helping them to heal themselves. So when we talk about, finding happiness to be able to quit porn and heal ED, healing comes from finding that place within you. Okay, so I'm not going to beat happiness, beat it like a dead horse, but what I want you to write in your journal is, what would truly make you happy? And I'm going to define the difference neurologically in a second, but happiness is that quiet, peaceful, joyful. It doesn't hit the nervous system hard. You don't jump up and down because of it. You find it and you want to stay in it for a little while because it's calm, it's quiet, it's awesome. If you've ever seen the movie Walter Mitty, which I know I've told you to watch a few times because it's such a good movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. In it, there is a scene with Sean Penn, and he's a photographer, and he's up in the mountains, and he sees a snow leopard. And as a photographer, it's his job to take a picture of the snow leopard. Well, Walter Mitty, Ben Stiller, happens upon him at the moment, and he doesn't take the picture. And he tells Ben Stiller that sometimes he just likes to stay in the moment because it's so awesome. That's joy. That's peace and happiness, when you want to stay in a moment because it's so wonderful. Now, here's the amazing thing about happiness. If you want to have happiness in your life all the time, you have to create those moments and appreciate them when you have them to be able to have happiness forever. So it's about finding the joy, cultivating the joy, creating the joy for yourself, and then being aware of it when it comes to you. So for me, what that looks like is I'll be hanging out, watching a movie with my family, and someone's always talking over the dialogue, always. And that the pleasure is in watching the movie. The joy is in looking at my family and laughing and being weird together. And the moment of taking everybody in, doing their things with each other. There's such joy in that moment. I'll always stand back and look at everybody and I'll be like, wow, it's amazing that I've created this life for myself with these beautiful people doing their weird things. My bonus son Connor always talks over all the dialogue. He looks everything up. But if he wasn't in the room, I wouldn't know half as much about the backstory about every single thing we watch. My son Declan's been getting jacked up. He's been hitting the gym. That dude has been shirtless for 2 months now. Crack my action up. He comes into the house. He literally takes his shirt off first thing because he likes being shirtless right now. My husband makes him put his shirt on. I'm like, Cass, enjoy the fact that this is Declan's shirtless phase, right? Totally awesome. Sheamus, he's the quiet wonder. He sits there, he's very quiet. And I never know what's going on in his mind. I told him I need to brain map him again so I can see how his brain is performing. Either he's super chill or he's on fire underneath it all. But he's a joy to be around. He's so funny. He's quietly hysterical. When he does talk, it's always funny. And then Saoirse's just a joy. And my daughters are amazing. So, that's the joy. And of course it's chaos, but then I can find the joy in the chaos. So that's gonna lead us to thinking about, what is your joy? What are the moments that you really, really love? Not because they're hitting your nervous system hard with pleasure, but because you can find peace in them and you can find happiness. And now here is the key. While you're not artificially inducing it. So if you're watching porn, you're using porn to offset the inability to sit in those moments. And we're going to visit that in just a second. But if you're still using porn, then likely those moments might be difficult for you because engagement in the real world becomes very difficult because of the dopamine deficit that's created by porn. The same dopamine deficit that makes for ED. And we're going to talk about that. But right now I want you to think about your ideal day, your ideal moment, your ideal life. If it's happy and it has peace and joy, what does that look like for you? It's different for me. I've got all these people. I wanted all these people in my life. hence giving birth to all of them, besides my husband, of course. But, I want them in my life, and this is a happy life for me. I've created it. I'm always checking in to make sure, are you creating the life you want? And, things come at me and that I didn't want, then I find a way to squeeze the lemonade out of them, and I still have the joy within them. And that's going to lead us to state happiness and trait happiness. So state happiness is something happy happens to you. So maybe it's your birthday. And so you're not getting tons of pleasure out of your birthday, but it's your birthday and you're in a better mood that day. That is state happiness. And it changes the way that your brain operates, and it changes the way that neurochemicals cascade. For the moment, state, you are in a state of happiness because something happy is happening to you. And so your birthday might be a perfect example. Honestly, I don't love my birthday, but I'm learning to. But my bestie Chanel loves her birthday. She is in a beautiful mood every single year on her birthday. She creates lots of fun for herself so that her birthdays are always amazing. And it creates state happiness all day long. Now that is fleeting. State happiness comes and goes. So the day after your birthday, you might be like, all right, it's just a regular day. That's a letdown. State happiness, it's good for one moment and then it goes away. Trait happiness is when you grow the ability inside through an optimized brain pattern to find the happiness even when life is kind of challenging. So, my goal for you is to create the least challenging life, but then be able to find the most joy in it, because it is the human condition after all. And I, over the years, have really developed trait happiness. I'm a happy person. There's not much that can take me down. And I had to develop that. I had to develop that over time. I exercise the muscle of happiness, which is my brain, by the way. I exercise my brain into the optimal mode or close to it. And now things very rarely rattle me out of happiness. And if they do, I can get back into it pretty quickly. My husband said it the other day. I was rattled out of happiness. And nobody likes it when I'm stressed out, which is pretty funny because all my kids were around. Declan's an Enneagram 4, equanimity. He always shows what's on his heart, I'm stressed out and I'm like, yada, 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 going off a little bit for literally 10 seconds, which these people go off all the time, I'm going on for 10 seconds and he's like, listen, I know this is Declan, who's 19. Listen, I know you're stressed out, but you don't have to stress out everybody else too. And I am thinking, oh my God, you people stress me out all the time. I am your self-regulator still, so I absorb that and I will regulate you and me during stressful times. But of course, that's the skill that's been developed. And as a parent, it's a really important skill. But I listened to him. I didn't go off on him. I went out the front door. I took a breath. I got my brain out of the pendulum effect into or close to the optimal mode. I shook it off. I'm not even kidding. It was 10 seconds. Thank God I can do this these days. I came back in and my husband was about to snap something else at me. I saw it in his eyes. He's like, she already shifted out of that. And later on he told me, he's like, wow, I can't believe you shifted out of that so fast. I said, I'm working on it, my brother, because he knows that I'm always trying to not ever get out of the state of happiness. But of course, sometimes you do. You don't have to, but sometimes as a human, you do. So state happiness is you feel happy for a little while. Trait happiness is you develop a life that creates happiness for you, and then you optimize your brain so you can stay in that happiness. And if something rattles you, my goal is to get to the point where I'm not rattled anymore. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to get to trait happiness that there's nothing that can rattle me. And that's a huge goal for me. But right now, if I'm rattled, I come right back out of it. And I try to be rattled as least as possible. That's what we're going for here. So that is happiness. If something super stressful happens and you can handle it and stay happy, my precious son Declan, apparently this episode's about him, my precious son Declan was hit by a car the other day. Someone hit him and ran. He thankfully has a deep gash in his hand, but they x-rayed it and there's no tendon or bone. It's his right hand. And he's in school for computer programming. So he's gotten his classes extended. He sends it out on the group text because he's very good too at self-regulating. hey y'all, I just got hit by a car. It's on the family group text. As his mother, I'm reading it like, and we've made a joke because he's kind of been coming and going from home. So we're like, he's the weird kid walking a mile across campus from his car to his dorm with a suitcase on a Tuesday. And I texted back out, did your suitcase break your fall? And my husband texted, I actually talked to my husband, after I talked to Declan, I called my husband who didn't see the group text. And I'm like, Declan got hit by a car, but he is fine. And my husband texted back out, you're so big, the car probably bounced off of you. That's state happiness. Super stressful having your baby doll hit by a car, hit and run. So if I would have latched onto that, I could have gone downward spiral of vengeance and anger. And, the proverbial downward spiral can take you to a deep, dark place. But thankfully, I've taught Declan how to regulate. The rest of the fam squad, that's what the group text is called, the fam squad can regulate. And Saoirse's like, OMG, Declan, I hope you're okay. I love you. This group text of just support from us, not overly clingy and anxious, just everybody regulating. Saoirse said that when she saw it, her heart came up in her throat and she started to tear. And she's like, but then I realized he's okay and I brought myself back down. She told me that. She's 12. Amazing, right? Okay, so let's go on to what we're talking about in terms of brain performance. We covered happiness and what it might look like in your life. So think about that. Spend some time quietly, slowly, with a beautiful cup of mycotoxin-free coffee, pondering that. Okay, so now let's move to number 2. Number 2 is what's going on in a brain performance pattern of happiness versus unhappiness. When you're happy and you feel calm and focused, your brain is in the green zone of electrical energy. It's in the middle. And when you're in the middle, and I call the other pattern the pendulum effect, the one of calm focus is in the middle, wired and tired, and stressed out, anxious, overwhelmed, exhausted, not able to handle anything, is very far out in the pendulum effect. So what I was talking about in my brain performance pattern is all of our brains swing like a pendulum. It's very difficult to stay in calm focus all the time. And it's almost impossible because we get tired, we get hangry. So we want to go for calm focus and then balance our life so we can stay there in the sweet spot. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But when your brain is in the sweet spot, the pendulum only swings a little. So for me, when something super stressful happens, I'm here in the middle, the green zone, optimized. I get a little stressed out and my pendulum goes like this. But then it's only a little, so I can bring her back in and I can respond and not react. I can bring it down and not go into the downward spiral of pain. I go in the upward spiral of healing, even when it's helping my son to heal from being hit by a car. And talking myself down so that I don't go into an angry place that someone ran away after they hit him. But if you're not regulated and you're not in the green zone, it's called neurological regulation, and it equals self-regulation, your ability to control yourself, your emotions, your body, your mind. And if you're in the middle, you can do all those things. And if you swing a little bit out, if you get a little stressed out, you can bring it back in. You get a little exhausted and overwhelmed, you can bring it back in. But if your brain is in the pendulum effect, you're swinging really far out here and really far out here. And when that pendulum swings, the further out it swings, the more issues you will have in finding and creating happiness in your life. Because essentially your brain's swinging into the really stressed out and anxious mode and the really overwhelmed and exhausted mode. And honestly, I was feeling a little overwhelmed last night. The hubs texted me. I was running around. It's been a week. I don't know how it's been for you, but last night he texted me. He's like, are we hanging when you get home? He gave me option number 1 and option number 2. Option number 1, and they're always funny. Actually, he's hardly ever texts. So it was like one of the longest texts. They're normally thumbs up. But the option was number 1, exhausted, showering, bed. Number 2, hanging out, and a couple other funny things. And I'm like, sorry, dude, it's option 1. And because I was feeling exhausted and overwhelmed, I was feeling a little cranky. I do not like to feel cranky. So coming home, taking a shower, Ted Lasso's out. I've talked to you about that. So we watched the new Ted Lasso in bed, getting cozy in the cone, as I like to call it these days, and just bringing all that energy down and going to sleep early. Beautiful. So that I can recover. And that's part of keeping your brain in this optimal zone, is being able to find that recovery time and knowing when you need it. And I told him, I want to stay up and hang out. I want to. That's pleasure. I want pleasure right now. But what's good for me is recovery, so I can find the joy tomorrow. So that green zone in the middle is that optimal brain performance pattern. That pendulum effect far out is the one that's going to make it so that you're seeking for pleasure to offset the pendulum effect. Let me put my notebook down. It's on my lap here. I'm always sitting on my legs, but the longer I sit here, I lose feeling. You know how that goes. So if your brain's out here in the pendulum effect, you need to offset it. It's very uncomfortable. The further out you are using the pendulum effect, the more uncomfortable your mind, your body, and your emotional state will be. So this is a time for you to check in, because if you feel stressed out, if you feel a lot of pain, if you feel exhausted, if you feel overwhelmed, if you have any negative emotional, physical, or mental stuff going on, then it is a dysregulated pattern. And so when I talk about it, it's episodic. I got something going on in my life. Yesterday was such a busy day and stuff kept coming at me, and I kept keeping myself in the optimal zone, but stuff came at me a lot yesterday afternoon, which means I had to work harder to be able to do that. So by the end of the night, I was exhausted. I went to get my nails done, one of my ways of finding joy in recovery, and I dropped Saoirse off at the barn for her horseback riding lesson. This is a true story. This is after a day. She calls me. The dude's in the middle of doing my pedicure. She calls me because her helmet is in my car. I'm like 10 minutes away from the barn. I had to get up, run her helmet, and come back and make that dude wait. Very stressful. And I was very proud of myself because I was regulating myself without losing it. And I got back and the guy's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine." I'm great. I'm good. I'm glad to be back. Everything's settled. I'm sorry about that. Of course, I gave him a big tip. I give big tips in the first place because I try to appreciate people and let that energy and money flow through me. But I give him a bigger tip for waiting. But that's an example of I'm trying to do something in recovery and then I get all jacked up and I get dysregulated. But then I bring it back down. And then I make a good choice. After a day of that, I just go to bed early. Instead of having drinks or watching porn or smoking marijuana. Those are all ways to find pleasure to offset the pain of dysregulation. That dysregulation is the pendulum effect. The further out it is, the more dysregulated you are. So if you have to go into the screen to watch porn a lot, your brain is in the extremes. What that feels like is anxiety, stress, depression, brain fog, overwhelm, OCD behaviors, mental health issues, pain in the body. Physical pain in the body is a manifestation of a dysregulated brain pattern. So check in on that. So in my work, what I do is I can see how people's brain performance patterns are operating using QEEG, which is electroencephalograms. I'm able to read brain performance pattern and share it with you. That's one of the services that I offer. That's one way that I can help you see what your brain is doing so that you're inspired to optimize it. And if you're interested in that, go to the QEEG brain map page on my website, drtrishleigh.com. But if you don't want to do that, or if that's not in the cards for you right now, check in right now on your state. Because if you don't have trait happiness or state happiness, if you have trait anxiety or trait OCD or trait depression, your brain is highly dysregulated in the pendulum effect. And you're using porn to offset that dysregulated brain pattern. Now let's go to the neurochemicals for a minute. Then we're going to talk about what the brain does to offset the pain of the pendulum effect. So Dopamine is the molecule of more. It's the neurochemical of seeking pleasure. It gets linked motivationally to the thing that you are giving it with the highest amount of pleasure. So if you're going to porn or some other sexual acting out behavior, you're flooding your system with dopamine to offset the pain of the dysregulation, the discomfort of the dysregulation in your brain, which creates discomfort in your body and your mind and your emotional state. So if you're going to porn and you're getting lots of dopamine, you're trying to offset that pendulum effect brain pattern. That's why my work is so important in this situation, is because a dysregulated brain pattern is at the core of a porn problem. So regulating the brain pattern and then finding happiness to keep it there is the solution. And we're going to get to that. But just so you understand, you're seeking out more and more pleasure to get more and more dopamine because cortisol is being shot into your system, those spikes of stress, and that trait stress is a factor of a dopamine deficit and too much cortisol, the stress hormone in your system, and you're trying to offset that. So if you haven't heard me talk about this before, I just want to do one little public service announcement reminder of porn is at the core of the dopamine deficit in your life. So if you have a pendulum effect brain pattern in all the states that I just described that come along with it, if you consume porn, we know from lots and lots of science that when you go into the screen to get the dopamine deluge, the flood, and you drown your brain in dopamine, it creates the dopamine deficit state in your life because your brain gets linked to the screen and porn and sex, hypersexuality, whatever that might look like. It plays out in tons of different ways for many people. But the key is that you're creating, every time you go into porn, you're reinforcing the dopamine deficit state in your life. So now you're hanging out with your family, and instead of being able to look across them in their weirdness, their shirtlessness, and find the joy, you're irritated and you're annoyed and you have anger. But that's not because the joy's not there. It's because the dopamine deficit state that porn creates. That's why you have to leave porn behind to be able to optimize your brain, to be able to cultivate the joy and happiness. It will almost be impossible to have true happiness if you're still consuming porn, because porn creates the opposite brain pattern of happiness, the pendulum effect, instead of the green zone. And I know you might be thinking, my life's happy, but it's medicated happiness. It's the dopamine flood. So if you stay out of the screen for a week, see what your life is like. You might call it withdrawal. I call it state dopamine deficit, state anxiety, state depression, but it's because of the pendulum effect. Hopefully you're with me. Hopefully you're connecting the dots. So porn is a supernormal stimulus that gives your brain tons and tons of dopamine, and it's always changing the threshold, so you need more, because you will build tolerance to the porn that you're consuming, and you will need usually porn with more intensity, more violence, genres that are more extreme, that push your buttons in terms of going over your moral code, so there's some friction there with anxiety and excitement. That's an escalation behavior. Or if you've moved on to acting out in the real world, that's an escalation behavior. The screen no longer does it for you. You need more and more dopamine because you've desensitized the dopamine receptors in your brain. They're called D2 receptors, dopamine receptors, and they get burnt out if you are constantly hitting the easy button of lots and lots of dopamine. That's the unhappy brain pattern, needs lots of dopamine, which fries the dopamine cells. This is proven by science. Now, this takes us to erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction is a product of a desensitized reward center and reward pathways in the brain. We know this. So when you flood your brain with dopamine deluge and drowning, and I can see this in people's brain maps, I see the flood. if you've drowned your brain, it will create a lack of ability to be responsive to normal or healthy levels of pleasure. So now you're trying to be with your honey in the real world and you can't get or maintain an erection because the screen is level 15 dopamine. Your honey on a good day is probably an 8 or a 9. So your brain needs level 15 dopamine and your beautiful woman is a 9. But the gap there is still too big for you to be able to get and maintain an erection and be able to have a sexual experience that goes all the way to orgasm. And that's why people struggle with delayed ejaculation. It is a brain problem because of the desensitization of the dopamine receptors in the reward center of the brain because of the pendulum effect brain pattern from watching the supernormal stimulus of porn. So hopefully you've connected all those dots. In your journal, do that. Connect the dots. It's important. So when you connect the dots, it goes like this. Porn watching, supernormal stimulus, very high levels of dopamine. The more you do that, you desensitize the reward center in the brain. It creates this cycle if you continue to watch porn, dopamine drip, dopamine deluge, dopamine drowning, dopamine deficit in your life, which leads to the pendulum effect brain pattern, which makes you feel anxious, stressed, overwhelmed. It'll give you OCD. It'll make you feel depressed. It'll make you feel like you have ADHD. Porn-induced ADHD is a thing, just like porn-induced erectile dysfunction. These are brain issues from the dysregulated brain pattern. So you are not able to respond to a healthy stimulus for pleasure because you've desensitized the reward center in your brain. There's another way that people do that, and it is called dopamine stacking. So porn's a supernormal stimulus, tons of dopamine. Supernormal stimuli and stimuli in general exist on a continuum from supernormal to normal to low. You have to do some math problems. If I had to do some math problems, that is a low stimulus. It spikes cortisol for me. It gives me no dopamine. But yesterday I was doing research on EEG and what it does. Honestly, I was looking up neurotoxins. You know how I am these days. So I was looking up neurotoxins and the impact on EEG. And my mind was blown, but I will share that with you if you are on my other channel, Brain Rewire, Dr. Trish Leigh. I'll be talking about that over there in a few weeks. But that gives me lots of dopamine. For me in particular, research about brain stuff that applies to my life and other people's life, that's dopamine producing. Your work should be dopamine producing. It's probably like 1.5 levels of dopamine. And yeah, I'm a 5, so I might be a little bit of a weirdo and I might get 2 levels of dopamine from doing that research. Chocolate, 2 times the amount of dopamine for most people. Sex, healthy sex, 2 times the level of dopamine, not 20. So when we talk about the supernormal stimulus and from a low to a normal to a supernormal on a continuum, people will stack dopamine producing activities. And I try to be aware of this in my own life, and I'll notice I'm doing it more, the more stressed out, or really just the more busy than I am. Coffee is dopamine producing for many people. And not only does the caffeine give them a little kick in the system, that's why a lot of people are stacking caffeine with workouts. Workouts are dopamine producing. So if you're stacking caffeine and workouts, you're going for a huge dopamine hit in your workout, possibly. And you have to watch out for that because those behaviors become either another way that you're chasing down dopamine throughout the day. So what I want you to do is find dopamine in a healthy way in your life, not stacking 4 things on top of another. So let me give you an example. Let's just say you pour yourself a cocktail, you smoke a little weed, you play video games, then you watch porn, then you eat a bar of chocolate, and you might finish with a scotch. That's dopamine stacking. Masturbation in there, You've got like 5, 6 dopamine, high level dopamine producing activities all stacked on top of each other. And that stacking is likely something you're looking for too. So the unhealthy pendulum effect brain pattern will look for supernormal stimuli to offset the feeling and dopamine stacking throughout the day. So watch for that in your journal. Try to figure out ways that you're getting dopamine. So they might be healthy ways, but you're doing it all the time and you're trying to put many things together. So it's interesting for me. I was thinking about this because I do a lot of driving. Actually, it's just my precious youngest daughter around, but with moving to a different house, we're further out from our house, and I'm in the car all the time these days. And I find I want to pour myself a cup of coffee for the road. And I'm like, what are you doing, sister? What's up with all the roady coffees? And I'm like, dang, I am trying to get some dopamine into what's a cortisol producing activity for me these days to offset it. So I've been pouring huge waters instead so I can regulate within that so I don't become coffee while she drives girl because I need it. I don't want to need it. I want to regulate within that activity. And then we've canceled some things so there's less driving. And I'm already psyched about it because I don't have to do it. So I don't need to offset it with something that is usually healthy dopamine if you're having it in moderation. So when it comes to dopamine stacking, figure out the ways you might be stacking dopamine by finding pleasure. And of course, porn's a supernormal stimulus. We want to adios that. Somebody emailed me, they wanted to know, is there healthy porn? My answer is no, because sex is supposed to be a participatory activity between two people in a relational way, not watched and consumed by another person. And I know we all want to believe that if we want to keep watching porn, but the answer is no. Go find some sex in the real world. If you are an adult and you are setting up your life for healthy sexuality, find a honey that you build intimacy with instead of watching sex on the screen. Okay, so now let's get to number 3. How do we leverage all of this? And I've already started to share that with you. First of all, figure out what your brain is doing. The more dysregulated you are, the more work there is. So if you struggle with erectile dysfunction and some of the things I mentioned here resonate with you, if you find that you're doing lots of dopamine producing activities, you're stacking, you got supernormal stimuli going on, you feel off the chain anyways, then your brain is likely very dysregulated. I want you to know that. When I see people's brains in the QEEG brain map, I'm like, I don't mean to freak you out and I don't want to be emergent here, but I do want to create urgency. There's urgency. If you struggle with those things, your brain is going in the wrong direction. All of this becomes a negative feedback loop. It's the downward spiral. It will not get better unless you change something. It will only get worse. There's no horizontal spiral. It's a downward spiral or an upward spiral. And my example of yesterday, busy day, crap coming at me all day long, I'm regulating. I was feeling the downward spiral. I'm like, I gotta stop at Starbucks and get myself a cappuccino. I did not though. I'm like, I'm gonna get my nails done, then boom, gotta go bring the helmet. Good choice at the end of the night. Recovery to get myself in a great place again today. Back in the upward spiral, my friend. I could have taken it and kept going in the downward spiral. So let's talk about this brain hack. How do you create happiness? It's in every moment. It's in every decision. It's in every action. It's in every thought. And if you're dysregulated, you might not be able to control this. That's why the tagline I accidentally came up with is control your brain or it will control you. And so for me, I'm trying to be really aware of this so I can make new choices every time. Self-awareness can be really low if you're still consuming porn. So if you struggle with erectile dysfunction, before I get to the hack, your brain is dysregulated. There's no way it's not, because basically there's no way unless there's something physical happening. And especially if you've been to your urologist and they're like, nope, no physical problem, then your brain is dysregulated. And it's highly dysregulated because if it wasn't, you'd be able to get erections with your honey. So the more dysregulated it is, the more work there is to close the gap. That's what I want you to know. And closing the gap is in the decisions, the actions, the thoughts, the behaviors. So if you struggle with erectile dysfunction and you can get a QEEG brain map with me, please do. It's important for you, especially if you've been in that space for any amount of time. I can point the way for you. I can show you where the dysregulated pattern is in your brain. I look into your history. I look into what you're doing currently in your brain performance pattern. I can connect the dots for you and point a clear path forward. I do it all the time. So sign up for a brain map if you can, financially, and if, energy, time, money, and energy. Those are the things that are necessary for healing, usually. If not, take what I've told you here and try to estimate the gap in your pendulum effect to the optimal brain pattern that just swings slightly and you're able to respond to everything without reacting. You don't get angry, you're not irritable, you're trait happy. If you're trait stressed and trait overwhelmed, trait anxious, trait demotivated, trait brain foggy, then you're dysregulated. If you can't get the QEEG brain map with me, then get the brain training headband. And there's another link on my website. They're all under personal neuro coaching. It says headband, brain training headband. Get that headband, buy it off of my website. I don't sell it, but you link through to the manufacturer. And when you do that, you get the best price point. And it's a really good pricing that they give me they give you for being part of my community and caring about healing your brain. Okay, so those are two really important things. Brain training is critical. If your pendulum effect's out here, brain training will unconsciously bring your brain back towards the middle. Now, what else can you do? On the subconscious level are all the things that are flying under your radar. Like, I didn't realize how much the driving was getting to me until I'm like, you know what? Being in the car all the time and the constant idea that I'm gonna pour coffee because I have to drive for 2 hours again, I realized then subconsciously this driving is bothering me. I took it out of the subconscious pocket and I put it onto the conscious plate, and I made a new decision to not drive that much, which requires my husband to do more, and I took some things off the plate. So subconsciously figure out some things that are flying under the radar. But remember, if you're watching porn, self-awareness will be low, difficulty regulating will be low. You have to stop watching porn first. That's essential to heal your brain from all of this. Then, consciously, you choose new actions, new behaviors, and new thoughts. So like when Declan got hit by the car, I initially had the thought, like, who hit him? And I'm like, it doesn't matter who hit him. It literally doesn't matter. He is okay. And he called me, he's like, oh, this is probably going to cost a lot, yada, yada. And I'm like, you're okay. We'll figure that out. That all comes out in the wash, as long as you're okay. And so being able to bring myself back from that, I made a new decision because my mind was going in that direction. But I'm like, no, you're not going in that direction. There's no good that can come from it. I'm always making the choices based upon, will this decision lead me to the happy life I want? Will this decision take me further away from it? And it's the decision to act, the decision to feel, the decision to behave, the decision to think. So every day I use my brain training headband. No joke, I do, every day. Because that's a decision to bring my brain into the optimal mode. It's a workout for my brain. I don't skip it. I physically work out every day. I take sunrise and sunset walks leisurely to give myself brain recovery. It's about doing brain boosting activities, brain recovery activities, and staying out of those brain draining activities. That's what I want to encourage you to do. I want you to encourage you to figure out, flying under the radar, subconsciously, what's stressing you out. Put it on the conscious platter, make a new choice, a new decision, a new action, a new behavior. Find the moments in your life that you can apply it, like the examples that I gave you. Okay, I hope that helps you. So please go over to Dr. Trish Leigh. If you need to leave porn behind, and I plan on making another podcast next week on stopping watching porn is only the first step. And I will explain to you why in that podcast, so stay tuned for it. But if you're still watching porn, or if you have erectile dysfunction, or you are still struggling in your relationship, or your brain is dysregulated and you know it from this podcast, get into my 90-day program. It's an unwire, rewire, hardwire program. It is for you to heal your brain from porn use and to heal erectile dysfunction, heal your relationships, get on purpose in your life through new actions, new thoughts, new feelings, new behaviors. And in that program, I outline them all for you. So get into that 90-day program. It's critical for you to be able to rewire your brain from porn use, especially if you struggle from erectile dysfunction. If you want to see what your brain is doing, get into the brain map with me so we can spend time alone in confidence, being able to point the path forward for you. And if nothing else, save your shekels and get the headband and start training your brain at home. It is a difference maker. It's a no-brainer, if you will, pun intended. All right, I hope this helps you. And as always, remember, control your brain or it will control you. I'll see you next time.